families. My name is Heather Deer, and I'm the Director of Family Engagement here at William and Mary. Thank you so much for joining us for this, our last webinar of our fall webinar series. This evening, we're going to be talking about all things living on and off campus, so the timeline for returning room selection, and also some wonderful resources and conversations to have with your student as they consider living off campus. This conversation is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel in just a few days. You can ask any questions that you have for our panel here in the Q&A feature in Zoom. We'll get to as many as we have time for at the end of our conversation. But with that, I want to turn it over to our panel so they have plenty of time to talk about the wonderful information that they have to share with you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my partners in campus living to share more about living on and off campus.
So welcome. My name is Laura Smith. I'd like to invite my co-presenters. Also is Harriet Kendall. She's our Director of Housing and Residence Life. And then we also have Lauren Garrett, who is our Director of Student Transition Engagement Programs. And once again, my name is Laura Smith, and I'm the Senior Housing Coordinator. So I'd like to welcome you all to talking about returning student room selection for this upcoming year. So we'll get right into our first topic.
And Laura, just before we go any further, just want to make sure that folks are seeing the screen.
Yes.
Perfect, perfect.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about the returning student room selection for 25-26 and also 25-26 off-campus housing options. So people ask, why would I as a student, or why would my student want to live on campus? Some of the things that students tell us is the convenience. They also feel a strong sense of community. Housing is inclusive of housing costs, such as utilities. Students have improved satisfaction with their college experience, as well as having those stronger connections with faculty due to proximity.
So we do have a 2-year live-on requirement. And so if your student is currently living on campus, they graduate in high school in spring of 24, then they're required to live on with us next year. And all of this is listed on our website also under our 2-year live-on requirement. If a student is a traditional transfer or a pathway transfers, there's different pathways. And so traditional transfers are not required to live with us on campus, and then pathway transfers, they are, and also are guaranteed that 2-year live-on requirement also.
So for the room selection, general dates and deadlines listed here, January 8th, we are going to have a Residence Life room selection info session on that date in the afternoon. We'll send out a link to the students the day before. It'll also have an additional time for Q&A. The housing application for 25-26 does open on January 21st. That's a Tuesday, and the contract is in the application. It all goes live that day. Students who want to participate in the room selection process, they need to get that housing contract on their housing application submitted by February 11th at 5 p.m. Also on that date is the same day that same room sign up needs to be completed. We're bringing that back this year. We're very excited. And then room selection begins the following week on the 17th of February.
I'm also going to stress it is really, really important that your students read their housing contracts because the contract does change from year to year. And so I'm going to stress it, read the contract before hitting sign. And once they sign that housing contract, they will also get an automatic email that will say, you've signed your housing contract for the 25-26 academic year, and here is a copy of it. And it will do some outlining of what they've just signed and agreed to. And so just reminding that it is really important to read that housing contract and our cancellation policy and protocol. So just going to stress that now. And with that, we want to make sure that students are signing their housing contract by 5 p.m. February 11th. That is more important because then that guarantees that they've got their housing application in and that they're more eligible to get a time slot for traditional room selection. Or if they are looking at other room selection options, then they have it all in by the 11th, because otherwise they may not get a time slot for room selection during traditional room selection or other pathways for room selection in the spring. And so just making sure that it's in and submitted by 5 p.m. on February 11th just guarantees that they have everything squared away. With that, once they have submitted their application, we will then email all students that they have a time slot and what day and time that time slot is on. Rising seniors would be first to choose their rooms, followed by juniors and then rising sophomores. That has not changed over the years. The thing that we've seen over the years is that we've had high wait lists. We do not anticipate high wait lists this upcoming year because we are opening just over 1,200 new residential beds. And I know although we're taking off 2 complexes this year or at the end of this academic year, we still have a bed gain, and so we don't anticipate a significant wait list. And so I just want families and students to know that. So again, it's also important for the late contract piece that if they have signed a contract after 5 p.m. on February 11th, they're not guaranteed that they'll get to be a part of room selection. And I know students are really interested in room selection, especially with some new buildings coming online. They potentially take themselves out of the running to do room selection or be pulled into a roommate group potentially. If they sign that housing contract after 5 p.m. on Tuesday, the 11th, or we're going to then potentially assign them to a room at random. And what that means is that essentially at the end of room selection, whatever spot is left is where they would potentially be assigned. And so again, February 11th is a really important date.
So new for 25, 26. People are very interested in who's going to be in what buildings compared to this year. And upcoming Old Dominion is going to reopen after a full renovation, and it's going to be assigned to our returning students. Our Westwoods 1 halls, which is 4 halls, is going to be a combination of returning and first-year students. Returning students are going to be in Maple Hall, Oak Hall, and the 3rd and 4th floors of Pine. Pine is the really large one attached to the dining hall. And then Pine Hall 1st, 2nd floors, and Poplar Hall are all going to be first-year students. And then with the Jamestown Triangle, it's going to be open also to a combination of returning and first-year students. Cedar, which is the new one, is going to be first-year students. Hardy remains returning students, and Lemon Hall is going to be first-year students again this year. Also, Chandler Hall is going to be switched to first-year students for the upcoming academic year. And Bryan Complex, which right now is a combination of first-year and returning students, is going to be all returning students next year. As mentioned before, Randolph Complex and Grinagall Village, they will close at the end of the 24-25 academic year. We will have a net gain of rooms, even with those spaces coming down. Language houses are going to be relocated to the Pine Hall 4th floor, and that's going to be now known as a Global Village once it makes that move.
So again, we don't anticipate a significant wait list that like we've seen in years prior. If one does occur, know that any student that remained on that wait list over the last several years, we housed every student on the wait list. It just might have been through July, and it just depended on how comfortable a student felt waiting on the wait list. We still will have our wait list Q&A page that will still remain on our website, but we don't anticipate a significant wait list. And we're really excited about that to be able to house more students this upcoming academic year. Especially with some new facilities coming online, and with that being a part of our housing and dining comprehensive plan. And so we're in year 3 of a 10-year plan, and we're pushing into phase 2 already. So just know that we're excited for students to be able to live in some new facilities. But as Laura shared, not every single new building that we're opening will be upperclassmen. It'll be first-year students also. But it's split pretty evenly between the two, between returning students and new students. So
the same room sign up. It's returning after, I believe, a 3-year absence. Students who are thoroughly pleased with where they live now, that are able to fill the unit for the upcoming year, are able to do same room sign up. And they must complete it by the same date and time as the contracts are due, which is 5 p.m. on February 11th. Students have questions, family have questions. What does a unit mean? A unit means they have to fill the entire apartment if that student wants to return to the apartment. If they're in a suite, they have to fill the whole suite. Not the entire suite or apartment has to return, or the entire room has to return to that same space. They can pull in friends to fill that unit. So if one person wants to return to a suite, they just need to find 3 friends. If they're in a 3-person apartment and only one person's returning to that apartment, they just need to find 2 other friends. We will have more information and a guide for this up in January. It'll be step by step, helping students and families walk through that. But we're very excited to have this option back for students.
Our website also shares where is eligible for same room sign up next year, because not every building, not every floor potentially is eligible for same room sign up, depending on if there is a living learning community there, or if the classification of the building is changing for next year. But students are able to see that information now, and we've shared that information out with them ahead of time. But if you're curious about your student's location and if it's an eligible space, you can actually see that on our website under our room selection timeline. Disability accommodations, this is really important. So if your student currently has a student accommodation for housing, students are required to renew this every year. And so now is the time to start that renewal process with student accessibility services so that they are ready to go by room selection. Because just like this previous year and other years, what will happen is that once a student goes through the approval process, SAS will send our office the same letter that your student receives with the accommodations that they're listed for. They'll do their housing application also. So they have the SAS accommodation and the housing application, submit all those items, and then our office will assign their time slot based on their accommodation letter. And then that's also what buildings they'll be able to see is based on that accommodation letter. And so it's really important for students to start having those conversations now, especially if the accommodations are working well or not working well. Then this is the time to start having those conversations and what that would look like. And so we just want to make sure that students have all of that in. And so for that paperwork to be submitted to SAS, for them to have a full review time and then submit the information to our office, that deadline for students is February 3rd. That's also listed on our website currently. And also that information has also been shared with students via the first housing email that went out in October. And so if your student has not had that conversation yet, now is maybe the time to start talking through that. Because winter break will go fast and then we'll be back. And before you know it, it will be February. So just make sure that we're ahead of that.
So similarly, religious accommodations, requests for religious accommodations are considered on a case-by-case basis by the Planning, Strategy, and Integrative Practices Office. Students need to submit their request also by February 3rd of 2025 so that that office can review their requests for approval. They also, if they are approved, they also receive an email listing approved accommodations. They copy a residence life, and we will give them the appropriate time slot for room selection as well as part of that early room selection piece.
And
So
unmuted. Gender inclusive housing is a part of our housing process. And so students are able to go through the process through the housing application. They do have to be 18 or older to be a part of gender inclusive housing. This is all on our website. It's a part of the housing process itself. There is not a special room selection time slot. What I will say is that there will be more options next year on where students can live based on our new buildings, due to having single-use bathrooms versus community bathrooms in our newer spaces. So that is something to look out for.
we always get a lot of questions, especially from rising sophomores. Are there going to be singles available during room selection? It's very, very rare that we've seen singles available for sophomores to select during the room selection process. Sometimes singles do become available during the academic year, and students can submit a room change request form. Please be aware that does open up in June, that first Monday. We're still trying to figure out where everybody's living throughout the spring for the upcoming academic year. So we do need people to wait until June to make their request. But please, we ask the sophomores, be sure, just like all the other students, have plans A through Z in case your top preferences are not available. And we do strongly, strongly recommend that they find a roommate to go through room selection with.
All right. So I'm going to click back over here and see if I can't get this going. So Harriet and Laura have given a rundown of the on-campus housing process for students that are returning next academic year. And so what I'm going to run through really quickly are some off-campus considerations for students who are pondering whether or not living in the surrounding city of Williamsburg, James City County, York County areas might be a better fit for them as they work through and journey through their university experience. For many of our students, living off campus is seen as a sign of independence. Some students want to experience, quote, freedom. Some students want to, quote, experience what it's like to live in the real world. And on the STEP website, we've created a series of educative pages to help inform students on what living in that, quote, real world might entail. And so we encourage them to think about sort of 4 buckets as they're moving off campus. We want them to be mindful of what are their sort of starting points? What's their budget? Have they considered cost of utilities? Have they considered what insurance might look like? Some of the money matter pieces. And then we want them to think a little bit strategically about what's important to them as they're picking their prime location. Safety and security is always something that we hear from families about what is it, where is the safest place to live? I'm concerned about my student walking to and from campus, from neighboring apartment complexes or housing. A lot of folks want to know about transportation. If my student doesn't have a car, how will they get from point A to point B? And then, of course, there's always the grocery or the meal access. So if a student is living off campus, can they still get an on-campus meal plan? Where do students typically find themselves shopping in terms of grocery stores, retail outlets, etc.? And so we encourage students to sort of take a deep dive on some of those beginning strategies as they figure out where they might want to live off campus if they've made the decision that living on campus is not for them, if they are eligible to do so, right? It all comes back down to that eligibility sometimes for our students. What's important for you as families and our students to hear is that living off campus does come with its own separate set of rights and responsibilities. Just as Harriet talked about the housing contract, living off campus often comes with its own set of tenant responsibilities, landlord lease agreements, etc. And so reading thoroughly and comprehensively is important for our students, whether they live on or off campus. We also remind students that they're still held to the student code of conduct when they live off campus. Their behavior reflects the university. And if there are times where we find that perhaps their behavior is not befitting the university conduct or values, they may find themselves being held responsible or accountable for their actions of either themselves or their guests to their off-campus abodes, much like they might find an on-campus living. And then, of course, thinking about tenant laws, landlord regulations, so on and so forth. And so reading for off-campus students is just as important when it comes to those documents as it does for our on. The other piece that we want you to hear very clearly is that living off campus does not mean that students are removing themselves from the greater, wider berth of university life. We want them to stay engaged. That engagement, though, might look a little bit different. And so we do ask students to still complete the personal information questionnaire each semester. They'll tell us where they're living. They're going to tell us what their plans are going to be in case of an emergency evacuation, just like they've had to do on campus. And they're still going to have to share with us an emergency contact. So some of those pieces remain the same. What looks a little bit different is that as STEP is talking to students pondering the idea of living off campus, is that we remind them of several other resources that may have been at their fingertips while living on campus. And that's things like staying in tune with university events. Living on campus, you can walk from point A to point B, you pass bulletin boards, you pass sidewalk chalk, and you see what's happening. Living off campus sometimes can remove you from those everyday marketing sources. And so making sure that they know about university communications, they're staying on top of emails, they've got the William & Mary mobile app, and they're able to access TribeLink and look to see what events and organizations are hosting things on campus. And then obviously staying in touch with information technology. So if there are troubles with accessing Blackboard or course websites, that they report those and that they stay in touch with faculty and staff as appropriate. Now, as students are considering those processes, you do need to know that there is a partner that the university is working with, and that is a partner that has provided and works with local landlords and property managers to create the Williamsburg off-campus housing site. Now, this off-campus housing site, you do have to register to go in to look for a roommate, to do any sort of applications, to do any of those pieces. You do have to log in with William and Mary credentials and be connected to our community, which I think is really important. But it does require property managers and landlords and folks who are providing rental opportunities. They actually have to log in and register with the site as well. So the off-campus partners who power this website are aware of these vendors, essentially. And so there is a little bit of a working relationship that is there. Now, of course, we can't vouch as a university for each and every one of these locations, but partnering with this external partner does provide a little bit more of, I'm going to say, reassurance that students' needs are hopefully going to be met by some of these locations. But of course, it's going to look a little bit different living off campus. If a student wants to live in a house or an apartment or a condo, it may look a little bit different if they choose to live in Yorktown versus the city of Williamsburg. But this site includes and provides students with a bevy of options. So they can actually filter and provide their searches based off of those core considerations that we talked about earlier. They can look at flexible things like move-in dates. When do apartments or units become available versus how long are contracts? So if you have a winter grad and they know they're not going to be here for a spring semester, they can do searches based off of when contracts are available or apartments are available. And so it provides a lot of really great opportunities for students to do some deep diving and to do some sleuthing on their own, maybe even before they're eligible to live off campus, so that they can become informed consumers. Part of becoming an informed consumer means that we are encouraging students, regardless of their living intentions, to join us at an off-campus education and housing fair. And it's really important that folks understand that this isn't just about helping students match with an apartment or a condo. It's about helping them understand that the transition from living on campus to off does, again, come with some of those rights and responsibilities. And it does come with a little bit of those, dare I say, life skills that we hope that they develop during their time with us. Now, we hold these fairs at least once a semester. For the spring, we anticipate a February or March date. We're still awaiting some room scheduling details for the upcoming semester, but it's a 3-in-1 event. So at this fair, we have campus resources. We've got local resources in terms of community agencies and services, and we have property management representatives. This is not a place where business is conducted, though. Property managers are not allowed to push contracts, signing leases, etc. during these events. This is about having open conversations, allowing students to ask questions, to dip their toe in those waters, and to really find out what their options are in the surrounding area when it comes to off-campus living, if that's something they're considering. Information about off-campus housing fairs will go out to all students, typically through those university marketing event channels that we chatted about earlier, events.wm.edu, TribeLink, and then Residence Life also includes information about off-campus housing fairs to appropriate and eligible student groups based off of how housing selection goes. So if there is a wait list and we have a housing fair that's coming up, they will share out that date, because we want students to be informed consumers on both sides. As much as we love students living on campus, we do understand that there are some students who might find that an off-campus situation is better for them and better for their university experience. So that's a little bit about the off-campus side. We're going to move into some Q&A that I think Heather is going to help us moderate, but want to make sure that you're aware of sort of these two resources in terms of emails. For room selection, you're going to get in touch with Harriet and Laura at myroom@wm.edu. And if you have questions about the off-campus housing transition, you're going to get in touch with STEP at step@wm.edu. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to focus in on our faces and turn it over to Heather.
All right. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Laura and Harriet. Lots of really great information. I'm going to start with, we have lots of questions to address. Now is a great time to submit them in the Q&A if you haven't done so already. But I'm going to start with kind of an obvious one, which is we're having this webinar for families this evening, but how does this information get distributed to students? And have they been made aware of the returning room selection process already?
Yes. So I mentioned earlier that the first housing email went out in October, notifying students that same room sign up was coming back, that we don't anticipate a wait list for next year. The room selection timeline, it links all to our website also. And so that was the first wave. They've gotten, I think, one more went out right before Thanksgiving, another email with the same, it's almost the exact same email with a couple of changes and updates, but they have already received all of this information. So every residential student living with us currently received all of this information twice already, and they'll receive it several more times to their emails so that we can really remind them that these timelines are important and they are coming up. And so they have received a lot of this information.
Wonderful. Are you holding any informational webinars or conversations for students? I know in previous years, maybe there were some Zoom calls.
Yes. So we're already doing walk-ins every day with students, and so students are welcome to always stop by our office or email myroom@wm.edu for questions. But also there is a scheduled webinar for January, and that is also in the email that went out to them with all the information slated. It's on our timeline, and they will also get a reminder email that that webinar is happening in January.
So, what is the process for a student who may be doing a semester abroad? How does that differ from the traditional process?
So we strongly recommend that students who are considering study away for an upcoming fall, that they go ahead and go through the room selection process. Often they're not 100% sure that their program is going to happen. We'd rather them secure their housing with us so that if their program falls through, they've already secured housing. That's one less thing they have to worry about at that time. And if they do go study away, then they'll just apply to come back with us the following spring. We open up our housing application for spring only students in November. With that, if they do a full academic year study away, we just drop their whole contract. So like I said, so if they're unsure and the process for study away isn't 100% confirmed, we do recommend they go through our process. If students do stay with us for the fall and they do a spring study away, we do have a contract release process for them to request to have the spring portion of their housing contract voided. We just need that verification from the Reeve Center or Washington, D.C. program or other program that they are doing that spring program. And then we would be able to release them from the spring part of their contract. It's very, I think our process is very study away friendly.
Yes, that's one of the reasons why I think students do have that wonderful ability. I think we're ranked #1 for study abroad. I think the ability to be flexible in that way adds to students' ability to make that leap abroad somewhere. Along the same vein, what happens if a student signs a housing contract and then they find off-campus housing after and they'd rather live somewhere out in the community? What is the cancellation policy?
So our contract is still with legal, but I can say that there are penalties. And so the last couple of years, there hasn't been penalties because we've had active wait lists. Again, we don't anticipate an active wait list. So through February 11th, there wouldn't be a penalty. Anytime after the 11th through the end of March, there would be penalties. It will depend on the time that they would cancel their contract through the end of March and what that penalty would be, but there would be a cost to canceling their contract. Once we get to the end of March, they wouldn't be able to cancel their contract. The option would then be able to apply for a housing contract release request through our housing portal, but there is criteria to that. And a lot of that criteria sometimes is what has changed since you applied for housing until now. And it excludes signing a lease off campus. And so when they do sign their housing contract in January or February, they need to be really conscious of what they're signing and what they're committing to with housing on campus also.
Okay. Good to know. And that's all going to be very plainly available to them in their contract. This is
Yes.
why Harriet stresses
Yeah.
the actual reading of the contract, as again, it is something that changes year over year. So those details, this is a good life skill for them to practice as they're signing some
Yeah.
of these big documents. I know we sometimes wave off fine print, but it is one of those things
Yeah.
that they should spend some time reading so that they understand any penalties associated with walking that one back. Okay.
Yes.
If a student has accommodations, when will they be able to have their room selection? And are there any specific halls that students with accommodations will have access to for room selection?
So students that have approved disability or religious accommodations, they typically receive an early room selection time slot, and early room selection takes place the week of February 17th this year. So that is before traditional. Traditional room selection takes place the following week. So it's very important that students get that documentation and requests for accommodations into student accessibility services by February 3rd. Regarding which buildings they'll be able to select into, that is entirely dependent on their list of approved accommodations. Just because you have an accommodation at all doesn't mean you get a specific building. We really work to match the building options to the student's specific approved accommodations. And if students have any questions, family has questions about how it may play out with specific accommodations, please have them reach out to my room so our staff can look into the situation and reply. If parents are asking for specific questions about their specific student, they need to be sure to include that passphrase information so that we can chat about individual students. But we can answer general questions as well without that passphrase.
Wonderful. Okay. I have some questions about some of our new communities. One is, are there any special requirements for students wanting to live in the new global village?
So that has not changed. So it's a living learning community. And so students do have to apply through the language house itself to be a part of the global village. And so all of that information is on our website through the living learning link on our website. Students have received the information too. And so if they're interested, they can reach out that way. But there is an application process. And then they do actually meet with modern language faculty. And then the faculty then select the students to be in those communities. And so they do go through a process. And there is a course, I believe, required with most of the language houses now for the global village. And so there is a process. Um, they will then get invited to be a part of the language house. They then have to then confirm or deny being in the house. And then that will then set them up for when they would go through for room selection, because that room selection happens prior to our traditional room selection timeline.
Okay. So there is a process. So if your student is interested in that global village or any of those living learning communities, there is an application process that they'll need to look into and complete. For the new halls, how can students learn about configurations and all of the new options that maybe they haven't seen before as they're preparing for room selection?
The options aren't truly new concepts to us. They're just new buildings. And so there are doubles, traditional doubles and traditional singles, and some suites in our new buildings. So if it's the suite style, it's a semi-suite. And so it's very much like our Lemon and Hardy, our DuPont, where it's a shared bathroom between two rooms. And then our doubles and singles, those are where the bathroom, it is still a community common bathroom, but how it's set up is that when you walk into the entry of the bathroom, there are two sinks, but then there are essentially four doors, and each door has behind each individual lockable door, it is a shower, a toilet, and a sink. And so it's almost like walking into your own bathroom at home where you're able to close and lock the door and bring your items in. And so that is how they're set up and designed. Each building is slightly different. Pine Hall, especially because it's huge. Um, by room selection, we will have floor plans up. And so students will be able to see the floor plans and the layouts of those buildings. and see where the bathrooms are and see where the common spaces are, because I know students do pick rooms based on what is either close or far away from, where the stairs are, where the elevators are. And so those pieces will be available to them prior to room selection. There will be images, but obviously they're not the real images because the buildings are still literally being built as we talk. But there will be some imaging that they can see of what the buildings will look like once completion of the buildings happen and when they're ready for move in the fall.
Wonderful. Even though the configurations may be very similar to us, it's still, exciting, shiny, and new if it's a
Yeah,
new hall.
yeah,
So I'm
exactly.
sure I'm sure students and families will want to even just do a little bit of
Yeah,
exploring of what the renderings will
yeah.
look like for those spaces. So Lauren, I'm curious if a student lives off campus, can they get a parking pass?
Yes. Parking passes are available for students who commute to campus, so they don't live in university administered housing, or if they are of junior or senior social status.
Okay. Are there any single rooms available for seniors?
So typically during room selection, there are, especially in the morning. Um, there may not be as many as students would like. We do have quite a few coming online this year back in Old Dominion. With that out for innovation last year, that did decrease our number of singles. But with it coming back online, we anticipate having more singles this year. So, but once again, need to make sure people have plans A through Z and just in case they're not able to get that preferred location or preferred building or room type.
It's always great advice. What is the process if your student wants to become an RA?
Uh, they need to complete their application to be an RA by December 5th. So they have about a day and a half to get that completed. That is done all through our employment portal. So if they go to Residence Life and then go select student staff on our webpage, that will then get them access to our employment portal and they can fill out the entire application there. The application is due on the 5th, and so now is the time. Literally this week, and then interviews will occur after winter break. They would know if they are an RA or not prior to room selection. And so once we get back from winter break, we'll actually be doing RA interviews that first week back. And so they'll know the first week of February if they have been selected to be an RA for the next academic year or if they've gone into our pool. And so also if they get put in the pool, they should stay in the pool because you just never know when you'll get picked up to be an RA later in the semester.
Wonderful. Okay. Are students who have registered accommodations eligible for same room sign up, or do they need to reapply for their accommodations?
They can go ahead and do same room sign up even if they don't have accommodations. So it's equally eligible for students for eligible spaces, regardless of whether or not they have accommodations. We do know that a lot of students who have gone through the accommodation process love where they've landed. And if their space is eligible for same room sign up, they are absolutely welcome to go through that process.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to do one last question and then I'm going to wrap us up this evening. My question really is about this winter break that we're about to have, where students are going to come home and they're going to sleep first and they're going to see friends second, and they may not want to take care of business. So, what advice does this crew have for families on the call as they engage in conversations with their students about their living situation next year? What are the things that they should maybe talk about and take care of over winter break?
I would say first to talk about who they've connected with in their time in our residence halls and here at William and Mary. We're very, very much about community and wanting our students to develop community, and students, especially coming in their first year, those are strong communities. And we'd like to see that continue. And we do see that continue in our upperclassmen halls. Especially with rising sophomores, we don't anticipate that they're going to be able to select into singles very much, if at all, during traditional selection. So definitely chatting about who have I connected with, who can I talk to about lifestyle needs, like am I a morning person, afternoon person, do I like to be clean, do I not like to be clean in my room, does my friend smoke, do they not smoke, is that important to me living in my space? So I would say have those conversations about relationships and maybe who would be the best person to live with, especially if you end up in a roommate situation.
Along the lines with Laura, I think it's talking about, is my roommate right now a really great fit, or maybe it's not a great fit, and how do I have that conversation with my roommate? We have seen in the past where the roommate is maybe not fully ready to have that conversation and then agrees to be in a roommate group, and then during room selection then pulls out. And so I think just having the conversations now is really important, because who makes sense to live with next year? What are their needs? Um, Also, I think it doesn't hurt to look at our website and look at where our buildings are located, what makes the most sense based on where you may have classes next year, what's going to make sense for dining wise, where's the closest to the amenities that you truly need, versus do I just want to live here because I want to live here, or what makes most sense for me as a student on the day to day.
As an aside, talking about winter break, it's a reminder students that feel that they may need to stay in Williamsburg over winter break. Our on-campus apartments are open over winter break at no additional cost, since winter break housing and traditional housing is not traditionally available. So if students are looking for that winter break piece, they should definitely concentrate on the apartments as they're in their room selection process.
My my biggest piece of advice when it comes to this decision and to this conversation, um, really dovetailing into what Laura and Harriet have mentioned, is oftentimes for our students, the grass is always greener. You know, it always looks really glamorous to live. It sounds really glamorous to live, you know, off campus, or it sounds really glamorous to live in this housing situation or not. And I'd encourage them to reflect on some of why they feel that way. And so I think it's a lot of asking open-ended questions, a little bit of the tell me more, um, versus a why. Because if you say why, they might get a little defensive. You know your children, you know your students. And so they don't want to feel like they're explaining, but help educate me. What, tell me more about this situation. Tell me more about, you know, is a single. What I'm hearing is that you have a really good roommate situation. Tell me more about why you're thinking a single might be your plan A. And if plan A doesn't work out, have you thought about what plan B might be? And really leaving it up to them to steer the ship. And that can be really hard. For those of you who might be first year families, if you participated in Heather's book club, and thinking about the out to sea theme, and keeping with that nautical, it really is about them steering that ship and thinking strategically and critically about what's going to help them be successful. And so it might be a location, it might be a person, it might be an environment, and encouraging them to utilize their resources. There's an awful lot of information available on the Residence Life website, and they have put an awful lot of in-depth, detailed, fine-tuned, detailed information there. And so encourage your student to do that sleuthing and to do that digging, so they can go in and be informed. Much like we talked about, we want them to be informed, critical thinkers. And this is one way that they can really start to pull all of those skills together in a very life skills practical way.
Wonderful advice. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening to share more about these processes and resources. Families, thank you for joining us on this last webinar of our fall webinar series. We have a great slate of webinars scheduled for the spring semester, so be on the lookout for that information in your upcoming emails. I hope everyone has a lovely rest of your evening. Hope to see you all on the Yule Log live stream in just a couple weeks, next Saturday or the Saturday after. I'll be in the Ren Yard, but I know that many of you will join us on the live stream, and hope that all of you have a wonderful rest of your December, and we will see you in the new year. Thank you, everyone.